I'm very honored to introduce the next keynote speakers. Nora Milotay, the person who has pushed in the European Commission's agenda on education, early childhood education and care. Many of us, when we participated in the last years to the working groups, we have been so glad to hear that there is somebody there that thinks about early childhood education and care, finally, on the European level. And we identified this movement with Nora. She's been working together with practitioners, researchers, policymakers, with NGOs, with civil society representatives to put together a quality framework on early childhood education and care. There were two thematic groups that were working and contributing through many meetings. The one was on early childhood education and care, and the second one was on early school leaving, which shows again the concern for consistency and continuity and transitions in between early childhood services and primary school education. So, Nora, I'm more than pleased to invite you, to give you the floor, to talk us a little bit more of what you have done in the last years with the help of so many people that trusted that you will help early childhood be one of the most important issues in the strategies on the European level. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope I will manage to speak about the most important things in half an hour. This is the most difficult task. I also feel very honored, actually, that I'm invited to this conference. Because I really think that it is wonderful to see exactly so many types of people, so policymakers, researchers, and practitioners, and I think many of you are present here. And I think it's also wonderful to see that you are not only from Europe, but also outside Europe, because I think this is a global issue. And I think it's an amazing moment in early childhood education and care, and I think this conference is one of the proofs for this. And I would also like to maybe link immediately my presentation to the previous keynote speaker, who actually, I really think, raised the most important issues that we should think about in early childhood education. And I really hope that I will be able to prove a bit that the policymakers think about many of those issues, and maybe sometimes for utilitarian purposes, they strengthen certain arguments above others, but that they try to do it for a good cause. So I would like to start my presentation with this picture, just to show you that the center of our thinking while developing policies on early childhood at European level, and I am from the Education Directorate, so we are talking now from this point of view, is about really thinking about the children, and the children for whom we feel a lot and whom we want to be happy and rounded persons once they become adults. So I will introduce our work in three parts. First, I would like to talk briefly, and even more briefer than I planned, about this interpretation or reinterpretation of learning and education, in which early childhood fits very, very much. Then I would like to introduce you a bit the policy that we did, mainly this proposal for a European framework on quality, and then a few ideas about how we are thinking to implement this, what are the challenges and what are the plans. This slide actually is from a currently running OECD project on education and social progress. What is the reason why I chose this slide? Because it is very, very interesting that among the skills in the middle, you can see that social and emotional skills are identified as very important skills. And I think when I want to talk about what I want to say by reinterpretation or interpretation of learning, I don't want now to say all the things that you know about the new skills that we need in the 21st century and all the technology, etc. But what I want to say is that there is a growing awareness that actually non-cognitive skills, social and emotional skills, really, really matter. They matter, of course, for well-being, for health, but they also matter very, very much for learning. And this is something that you have to develop, and you can develop from very, very early on. And this is particularly important for disadvantaged children, but of course it's important for all children. And we can also, and it also shows that learning, and this is another awareness, learning doesn't only happen in the strict confines of schools, but it happens in the community, in the family, in the workplace, and this has to be taken on board as well. And I think this is how we create a very important place for early childhood on the education agenda. So this is what we are trying to do. And so my next slide is trying to show that the policy implication of that is that it's very important that we take early years seriously from an educational perspective. And here I would point out one thing, which is I know that everybody in the field, and the closer you work the children, the more worried you are that this means turning the early childhood services into schools. And so I would very much say, and I hope that our efforts will help that I would imagine the development actually the other way around, that early childhood services have a lot to teach to the education, to the current education system, because it's outside the compulsory education system. It is very innovative. It works a lot with the parents, with the community, and these are trends that more and more are taken up also in policy thinking concerning schools policy. And I have put up this word of disruptive innovation, which is actually something that comes from the business and technology world, but what means that it describes an innovation that improves a product or service in ways that the market doesn't expect. And in that way, it changes actually the market. And this is what I'm trying to say. It's a very distant association, but I think it is very important that it is not about assimilation or integration. It's about growing and changing also the education continuum. This slide I will skip, but basically I just wanted to say that it's also a very important moment because the structural changes take a very long time. Of course, in history, I am originally a historian, so I am obsessed with the historical perspective on things. But there is a conjuncture sometimes of certain phenomena that really gives a place for certain things to happen. And I think that the immediate challenges that we have now with migration, with the economic crisis, with the changing labor market needs, with the globalization of markets, this really gives so not only an intellectual but a practical niche for this field to develop. So far, in the European Commission, so I'm very honored that I am identified with Miss Early Childhood, or I would rather say Mrs. Early Childhood at European level, but actually there are other sectors that actually have put early childhood already on their agenda, but from a very different angle. One is the child rights angle that is dealt with by the Directorate responsible for justice, for mainstreaming children's rights in all European policies. And another one is, some of you who are European probably you are aware of, is this Barcelona target that is about encouraging member states to have more places of childcare mainly, so that women can return to the labor market. So actually, it is in this discourse that we thought we have to bring in much more, for all the reasons that I said before, the focus on children and their families, and the way we want to do it is that we focus on quality. So now I come to the second part of my presentation, which is about what kind of policy we are trying to develop from an education perspective. The big picture in which we can do that, because we always have to have a mandate in which we can push for these issues, this is that within the EU 2020 strategy, That is the strategy for the European Commission in all sectors, in all policy sectors. There are actually 3 headline targets that are linked and that encourage the development of early childhood. One is that by 2020, the share of early school leavers should be under 10%, and we know that early childhood, effective early childhood, can help by creating a good foundation to have better attainments at school, have less underachievement, and as a result, less early school leavers. Another one is the poverty target, which says by 2020, 20 million less people should be at risk of poverty. And we know that early childhood is very good in breaking the cycle of intergenerational poverty. And the third one is a bit far-fetched, but it's about having more tertiary graduates, to have 40% by 2020. And we know that early childhood, again, creates the possibility, as I said, a good foundation for learning skills, beget skills, so it's also linked to that target. So it is in this big policy framework that we could come forward in 2011 with a communication. This is a way of putting things on the agenda at the European Commission, with a communication on early childhood education and care. The other document, the Council conclusions, that means that ministers have endorsed this idea that we should deal with this issue at European level. This communication basically emphasized that beside access, which is a very important issue, and we have to keep it on the agenda and actually have to broaden it, because it's not only about how many children are in the services. We also have to deal with the issue of quality. And the other important thing was that we should address children from birth to compulsory school age. I understand we should have done it from conception. I understand it from the first speaker. We didn't go that far yet. But from birth to compulsory school age, and in a holistic manner, meaning we shouldn't only think about their cognitive development, but also about their social, emotional, and physical development. So all policies should be geared towards that. I think on the next slide, this is just what kind of the communication was encouraging. And some of the things we already started to do at European level. So we do already regular monitoring of these participation rates. Another thing that we have started to do, that we commissioned several studies to widen the evidence, the European evidence base on early childhood education and care, because what we have found is that when we wrote the communication, that a lot of the evidence that we have is from the Anglo-Saxon world. So we really felt we have to strengthen the European evidence base. So we have commissioned several studies, and actually one of it was presented in one of the workshops on the relationship between early childhood and early school leaving, but the core study on staff competence requirements was also commissioned by us. And now there is a very big one in Horizon 2020, the CARE project, which is about the quality of early childhood education and care. And the most important thing that we started to do was that we started policy cooperation with the member states. That meant that we, through the areas that the communication has identified as important for quality, we started to discuss and think together what are the real issues within these very, very big issues. So this chart basically shows which are the areas on which policymakers can have an influence. You see access and quality on the two sides. And then what can policymakers influence? One is about getting more places, getting more funding, about the workforce, the curriculum, monitoring and evaluation, and governance. These issues were all raised already in the communication, and we went deeper into this topic through our work within the thematic working group. This is just for interest. So this is something, this is access according to the Barcelona target. Here countries are monitored basically, and so the last report was published in 2013. And so you can see that there are 6 member states. The horizontal axis is for the children between 3 to 6, 90% should be in the services, and the vertical is children between 0 to 3, and there is 30%. And then you can see that there are 6 countries, the green ones, that already reached both targets. The others in the middle have reached one of them, and those down here are the ones that are still far from all of them. But of course, immediately when you look at it, there are lots of arguments that this in itself doesn't say enough about the system, but it's something that is very, very important. Of course, this is only formal center-based services. The next slide I really have to skip because I will not have time to talk about the important things. So this access was already monitored, but we said we have to look at the whole issue in a broader way, in a child-centered way. And I said that we have to focus on quality by still keeping accessibility on the agenda. And with the group, we have decided that the best way to do that is to create a proposal for a European framework. Why a framework? Because the systems are very, 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 very diverse in Europe. And a framework is something that is not prescriptive. It just gives guidance, and it can be tailor-made then by either by the countries or even by the localities. That is the idea. And of course, according to a framework, you can start from different starting points, because we are also aware of that countries are at very, very different levels. But what is very important, that it will still reflect an understanding of what we mean by quality. And on that, we have a consensus. And that is what is very important. So we have to, because you probably know the literature, that what is quality, you can discuss it for years. So this is why we said that this framework will help to generate a culture of quality when we think about early childhood policies. Now I will guide you through a few more slides which shows other, let's say, transversal principles that we thought about when we thought about the concrete statements and messages of the framework. One is the image and the voice of the child. We heard in the morning that this is very much based on values, on cultures, what you expect from the child, how you see the child, whether it's a mini adult, whether it's somebody you have to educate from early on or you have to let go. So this is very, very different in every culture. But what we in the group said, that we have, our image of the child is that of a strong, competent, and capable child who is a partner in learning and who is at a certain stage of human development. And that when we develop our policies, we have to listen to the voice of the child also, so that it also can express its views. This is one guiding principle. Another one is about partnership and the competence system. Child development is a collaborative project. You remember, thank you, my first slide. Am I speaking slowly enough? Because I could see that is it okay? Yes? Okay. Because I'm very stressed about the time. So that, and so I have the tendency then to speak very quickly. So it's a collaborative project, and we have seen in one of the first slides that I said in how many places this learning happens. And so it is very important that there is these influencing factors talk to each other, and that there is some coherence about what they give, what they deliver to the children. So it is very important that all the stakeholders are empowered. This means the community, the parents, the school maintainers, etc. Another idea is that the competence is also, it's not only about individual competencies of organizations or individuals, it's about a competence system that is multi-level and multi-layered. And it's very important that all these players communicate with each other, because of course this helps to find sustainable solutions that can also have proper funding, because at the end of the day, this is what is the most important. And the last guiding principle is that we are mainly focusing in our work on process quality. Now, here I want to pause for a second. There is a lot we have found that, of course, all countries talk about quality. Even all countries would say that the quality has improved. But actually, according to which criteria, not very clear. But if you really push it, then the only things that are really measured are mainly structural quality indicators. Sometimes when it comes to outcomes, in some systems, children are measured for school readiness or on language competencies. But basically, not much is said about the process, which seems to be the most important. So this framework wants to focus or wants to push policymakers that they focus on the quality of the process, which is about interactions and relationships. And of course, this is very, very difficult, but this is the main focus. And of course, in this then, staff, the workforce has an extremely important role. On the next slide, you can see the structure of this framework proposal. So around, you can see the main guiding principles. And in the middle, we have put that the aim is that we have quality informed by high expectations. And we have defined high expectations. Actually, we have defined a lot of terms for this framework. We have a glossary in the framework, so that there is an understanding, because we have found that it's very difficult to have a conversation actually about early years in an international context. So we have to agree on concepts, and we were working in English, so we agreed on concepts in English, which is in the glossary. And we said, once we agree on the concept, everybody can translate it into their own language. So by high expectations, we meant high expectations occur when ECC systems and staff within the system are child-centered and focus on what individual children can do, what they can learn, and what they can achieve with support. This helps to create an environment where children are actively encouraged to reach their full potential, and their success and achievement is recognized and seen as an important part of the learning and caring environment. So high expectations doesn't mean that we put the bar so high that nobody can reach it. It's really about encouragement. All the policy fields, you can see there are 5 big policy fields which were already in the communication. So we focused on those 5 policy fields, and in each of them we put forward 2 main statements that we think reflect the most important issues that have to be addressed within that statement. And I will now go through these statements. Hopefully I will have enough time. And the way I will do it is that parallel to our work in the working group, we have a network that is collecting data, not only on early childhood, on education in general. And they have published a publication called Key Data on Early Childhood Education and Care, which I think was actually put out in the lobby in some volumes, so you could find it there. And I will show you, I thought it's interesting that you see a picture still of the issue. Of course, they could only collect system-level structural indicators, but still, so that you see what is going on in this area and what we as a working group were actually recommending in this field should be addressed. So the first field is accessibility. So it is very important that the group absolutely recognize access and accessibility as a feature of quality. This is not something that should be discussed separately. And I think this is a very important message for policymakers, because if you only push for having more places, then they will have regulations to have more places, which is on the detriment, and there is proof about this, on the detriment of quality. So this is wrong. The two have to be addressed together. This is about affordability and availability. We know that in most EU countries, at least 1 year is free. 1 year of early childhood. Generally, this is the last year. In nearly half of the countries, actually, it is free from 3 years onwards. But the systems that work the best are, of course, systems that allocate with free. There is also a legal entitlement, so there is a place guaranteed. Because if it is free but there aren't enough places, then there is a problem with supply and demand. And so you can see that the systems on the bottom, those are the ones that actually have already, this is Denmark, Germany, Estonia, Slovenia, Finland, Sweden, and Norway, that have legal entitlement basically from the end of parental leave. So that means all children have the right to a place, and they actually additionally have also targeted support for the disadvantaged to really get them, yes, into the system. Because it wasn't given then. Because this is, they get the information through their networks in the countries. Okay? And in addition to that, you can see that this chart shows the relationship between supply and demand, and I will not have time to big details about that. But the general picture is that you can see that for the under 3s, basically, the demand is higher than the supply, except in the Nordic countries. And these are the countries that have legal entitlement from very, very early onwards. There are countries, actually, that have legal entitlement, like Estonia and Slovenia, where it's still the demand is bigger for the under 3s than the supply. Of course, there are also then within the country regional differences in terms of demand and supply, rural and urban, and then for the over 3s, it is a bit better. There, the demand meets more often the supply, but this is exactly because there is more regulation about having to give a place, and that there is a legal obligation for that. Unfortunately, there are a lot of examples where the way they try to solve this problem is that they try to relax certain standards, and this way they can have more places. And this is very dangerous. So what are the messages then in the framework for these two fields? One is that we have to make sure that the services are available and affordable for all children. For this, the admission policies have to be tailor-made. It has to the opening hours have to meet the demand of the group to whom the service is addressed. Another thing, and the other message is that the provision has to encourage participation. So it is very, very important that the staff is geared to work with diverse groups of children, that they can work with diverse groups of parents, that they can reach out to them and not only bring them to the service, but also keep them in the service. So these are the two messages concerning accessibility. Actually, if I go back, I think, I don't know whether you will get these presentations, but here you can see everything together, because I have written in a shortened version the messages. Then the next area is workforce. The picture is still the same, that for the younger children, generally the staff qualification requirements are lower, but still the new trends show that at least in terms of continuous professional development, there is a professional duty now also in more and more countries for staff that works with children under 3. In many countries, the childminders also need to have some kind of qualification. Now, the messages that we brought forward in the framework is that we need a well-qualified staff whose initial and continuous training enables them to fulfill their professional role. So it's very important that this workforce is professionalized, that they have a career perspective, and that there is some kind of common education for staff for the whole age range. This way, they can have a shared agenda and a shared understanding. And this should be actually the case also in systems that are split. The other message is about the working conditions. So this is about training. The other one is about conditions, that supportive working conditions, including professional leadership, which creates opportunities for observation, reflection, planning, teamwork, and cooperation with parents. So these are the two main areas where we think policies need to focus. The third area is the area of content or of the curriculum. In most countries, you can see the red is when there is some kind of curriculum or steering document or standards for both age groups, and the other one is when it's only for one, and of course these are generally the older children where there is one, and in some systems there is a curriculum even for the home-based services. What we can see is, what is very important is that in those ones which have guidelines for both, and particularly in the unitary systems, where actually the whole, from 0 to compulsory, they are considered as one big age group, the education element is much stronger. Very often in the split, there is an understanding that care is for under 3 and education is over 3. In terms of the content of this curricula, most of them have learning objectives, learning approaches, and here you can see that in all countries they target personal development, emotional and social development, but then there are other factors that appear only in some of them. And as the children get older, of course, the cognitive become very, very important. The framework emphasizes that it is very important that the curriculum is based on pedagogic goals, values, and approaches which enable the children to reach their full potential. So this is all related to combining care and education, and to somehow co-construct knowledge together with the children, meaning making together with the children. So this should be the focus, not only the cognitive subject areas. The other message is that the curriculum should be designed in a way so that it pushes staff to work together with the children and with the parents and with each other, and that this way they can actually always revise the curriculum and tailor-make it to the moment in which they use it. The fourth area, is about governance and funding. There are two types of systems in Europe, and one is prevailing in the Nordic countries and in the Baltic countries and Croatia and Slovenia, which is the unitary system, that they are in one, children from 0 to compulsory are in one kind of service, and the split system, which when they are in 2, this is in the other European countries. Some countries have mixed services, that they have unitary and split as well. What is very good about the unitary, as I said, that it really strengthens the education aspect, but also that there is much more coherence in terms of designing the curriculum, in staff training, and then, of course, also in issues of funding. So this seems to be a very efficient way of addressing early childhood services. Many countries have actually also home-based services, but very few, maybe a dozen, have actually data about it. So it is also very difficult that when we work on quality, systems that actually build a lot on home-based, like Germany or Finland, they really want that we also address those, but it's very difficult because we don't have data, so it's very difficult to talk about them and to address them somehow. This unitary system is then also reflected in the way which kind of ministries take care of it. I think we heard that there is now a tendency that more and more, because of the awareness of the education aspect of early childhood, the Ministry of Education takes over, but still in the split system, very often, it's 2 ministries. And then what we are saying, it's very, very important that still they talk to each other. This we already said in the communication. Now, what we are saying in the what we are saying in the framework is that it is very important that all the stakeholders who are involved into the services should have a clear and shared understanding of their roles and particularly of their responsibilities. Because in the systems where there is a big stakeholder involvement, there is a lot of responsibility also on these stakeholders, and they are aware of it. And this is why it works so well. They should know how they should collaborate with each other. And there should be then alliances among these stakeholders. The other message is about the fact that there should be legislation, regulation, and/or funding that supports progress towards universal legal entitlement to publicly subsidized or funded ECEC. So it is, and that this progress is regularly monitored, because it is clear that not all countries are in the position to introduce legal entitlement from the end of parental leave as of tomorrow. But the aim or the vision should be that one day they should arrive there, because it is clear that those systems work the best, that have that. That is clear from the data. A last one on which actually I don't have, because I couldn't find good slides on that, is about a very important issue, which is about monitoring and evaluation. Monitoring and evaluation is, of course, this is an issue in all the countries, and there are a lot of people, a lot of organizations involved into monitoring. This is what we saw, but they not always communicate well with each other. The data that they collect is not always well communicated, not always consistent. And also, very often, those organizations that are responsible for monitoring are not responsible for accreditation, for instance. So it doesn't. So the monitoring results don't feed into policy development. So it is, and the monitoring generally is about, as I said, structural quality, compliance with health regulations, with group sizes, with staff qualifications, etc. So there we said the most important is that local, regional, and national level is linked in monitoring and evaluation, and that it leads to quality improvements. The communication is extremely important so that it happens according to the same reference tools. And another one is that the monitoring and evaluation, these were very big discussions in the group, happens in the interest of the child, so that we don't, so it's not about naming and shaming, it's about developing the system, and not about having better child outcomes as of, I don't know, tomorrow, better outcomes in literacy, etc. So this was the proposal. This is a proposal that is put forward by a working group. And now the big question is, and this is the last part of my, and I know I ran out of my time, what we can do with this proposal. So at the moment, this is a proposal by a working group. We had 27 member states, 25 member states plus Norway and Turkey. And the question is what we can do with this. So how can we use this how can you use it in your countries? We have to make it available for you. And actually, here I will show you first what the possibilities are at European level, because maybe some of you are not aware of how European policy works. European policy making in education is a soft policy area. There is no legislation, and this principle of subsidiarity is very, very strong. And the deeper you go in the school, the lower level you go in the school system, the more this works, because the more the culture, etc., dominates. So already in schools, it's very difficult. In early childhood, even more difficult. It was very difficult to push the communication through already. So what are then our tools through which we can still push our agenda? One is that we have programs through which we are financing projects, and there we can put forward certain priorities, and this way we can push our agenda. This is the Erasmus Plus in education and Horizon 2020 in research. Then there is the political cooperation. This is that there is an EU 2020 strategy on all. It is the Education and Training 2020 strategy, which is basically the same as the EU 2020 just for education. And there is the European semester. The European semester is basically an evaluation of countries' progress in all of their policy areas, which then leads to country-specific recommendations, which then also, of course, influences where the structural funds should be used. And the third is the open method of coordination. The thematic working group worked within this method. This is basically setting common objectives, monitoring those objectives, developing guidance, reference tools, how to reach those objectives. But these are all very, very soft tools. So when I speak about next steps, you have to see it in this big picture. In the early childhood field already, it features already in the European semester because there are country-specific recommendations. 10 countries, last year 14 countries got country-specific recommendations concerning early childhood, and this year 10 countries. In terms of peer learning, this was the thematic working group that we had. Policy debate, this is that we have regular meetings of directors generals for schools who actually also deal with early childhood. So it's a bit higher level than the people in the thematic working group who discuss schools issues. And the last one is the funding. And there is the European Structural Funds and Erasmus Plus and the research program. This I already mentioned. So in education, the plan is that basically somehow this framework should become a European policy tool. So for this, it has to become a political document. For that, we want to develop or allocate indicators to these statements, or at least proposals for indicators. Of course, we are working on that now. It is very difficult because it is about process. So some of the indicators we might not even have. So we are at an early stage. We also do country analysis with the help of the framework to see where countries are standing with these issues that we addressed in the framework. And then we also, in the next periods of Erasmus Plus, early childhood is a priority area in several key actions. And there we very much want to encourage that there is experimentation and piloting of services which actually manage to bring in disadvantaged children and find very good governance and funding mechanisms to arrange that. Because we know that this is outside, as I said, compulsory education. So of course, ultimately it should be publicly subsidized, but maybe from tomorrow, it's not possible, so maybe we need to have public-private partnerships. And then the last area where we want to do more work is, of course, in the research. So these are our plans in education. But as the previous speaker said, there are also other sectors that have to address early childhood, and this is the case also. So on my last two slides, I just introduce how other directorates, so other fields, try to address the issue of early childhood. The Justice Directorates will carry on working on children's rights. And there is also a lot of work on reconciliation of work and family. So to help countries to remove barriers so that women can go back to the labor market, so that men take more responsibilities at home, etc. And in the Employment Directorate, some of you might be familiar with the recommendation for investing into children. That is actually very much focusing also on early childhood education and care. And employment puts very big emphasis also through the country-specific recommendations, so that those recommendations are really implemented, which are in that recommendation, and which is about basically giving access to disadvantaged to quality services. Of course, then immediately the question will be, but why are we working in silos? We are trying not to work in silos. So for instance, the country-specific recommendations we have already done in consultation. So more and more, it's not only the access that comes out in the recommendation, but also to focus on quality issues. And also we have written a guidance paper for how to use the European structural funds in the field of early childhood, and that is very much focusing on the latest policy recommendations, so on the issues that we were addressing in the framework. But of course, it's far from being perfect. So I would close with this picture, and I have chosen this picture because I think that beyond this hall there is a very beautiful world, and I was trying to look at that world from one angle, which is that of education, but still by showing to you that we understand that the world is very big outside. And I think we have done a very big step, but we still have a lot to do.